My name is Kim Sapp-Dinwiddie. I am a training manager for advancement training and outreach at University Development and Alumni Relations. Prior to my current role, I spent nearly 9 years in central HR as a senior talent acquisition consultant and a staff development trainer. So I have a great deal of experience both prior to that in corporate and higher ed education sectors doing recruitment and training. So please ask any questions you have throughout the session. One thing to keep in mind is consider asking questions about the topic that's currently come up, because some of the topics you may have in mind that haven't yet come up may come up, and then I'll try and leave 5 minutes at the end for you to ask questions that perhaps were not addressed in the session, okay? Given that we only have an hour. So obviously here today, this session, we're talking about resumes employers select. And the significance of this title is that a very good quality resume is not going to get you the job. What it's going to do is it's going to get you the interview invitation, and that's the goal. That's your number one goal of a quality resume. So when you think about your objective is to get a phone call from a recruiter for the job that you applied for with that resume that says we'd like you to come in for an interview, or we'd like to phone interview you first and then have you come in thereafter. So that's the goal. We're going to talk about resume design as well and how you need to demonstrate your highest level of responsibility and contribution to an employer when you're looking into a new opportunity. Okay, so purpose of a resume. We talked about this just a second ago. You want to get an interview. That's number one. And you also, in doing that, you want to highlight all your experience that is relevant to the job in which you're applying for. Some people say, do I need to put everything I've ever done on my resume? The answer is no. But you also want to be conscientious of leaving out large time blocks for providing red flags for the employer. And what you do want to do is make sure that you show the employer through your descriptors throughout your resume how you have demonstrated capacity to do the job they're asking you to do in the new opportunity. So yes, you're going to highlight your past experience, but as it pertains to and is related to the current job of application. Any questions so far? So resumes have been a part of job application protocol for years and years and years. People say, why do you need these resumes per se? But number one, it is a marketing document. So I want you to think about it that way. It is a self-marketing document of you. Companies brand themselves, so do you need to brand yourself. So think about it from that perspective. You're demonstrating your level of responsibility and contribution at the highest level that you have contributed to past employers. So you don't want to be false in what you're presenting about yourself, but what you do want to do is show the highest level of contribution, because the higher the level of contribution, the more salary negotiation capacity you have in the end state. Okay, so that's the job interviewing session after this, if you want to get into that more. All right, the other thing to think about is when you put something on a resume, outside of the questions that would be asked in an interview situation, your resume is actually fair game for them. So if you have something on there that they didn't necessarily ask a question about in their standard protocol and list of questions, they can say, oh, I see you did X, Y, and Z. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? So your resume becomes a platform for them to inquire more. And again, it's not going to get you a job on its own merits. It's going to get you in the interview. And then in the interview, you need to do a good job of answering their questions about how you're qualified for that role. So as we dig deeper into the concepts of resume design, we're going to talk about how the readers see your resume. We're also going to talk about applying specific job description terminology, format and formatting, and the mechanics of resume writing. All right, when we talk about resume design, one of the things you need to be aware of is that outside of actually having the content available to the reader, you need to make it aesthetically pleasing. Does it have a nice amount of white space as well as content for the resume? And is it easy for those who are going to be reviewing it to read it? And this is an important question, because no longer is it usually just a recruiter or just a hiring manager. As many of you well know at Berkeley, it's a panel of people that are looking at this document. It is not just one person. So think about the constituents and the people that would have a vested interest in hiring you for a particular role. Those are the people reading this. And they must contain appropriate content to summarize and highlight your knowledge, skills, and abilities. We call those KSAs, to show how you're able to do the job you're applying for. So when you highlight your past work, you're not just going to be thinking about what you did in that past job. You're going to be thinking about how it relates to and would show the next employer that you can do something that they need you to do for them. So it may mean that you can tweak the project or situation a little bit to highlight that particular feature of the new role as it is described in the new job description. So talking about the job description itself, you want to really hone in on the key words that are used in the job description for any employer, because Berkeley, as do other organizations, look at the key words in the resume relative to the job description that was written for a particular position. And as long as there are a list of particular key words and skills and qualifications affiliated to a given role, employers are going to look to make sure you've met that criteria when they're going through a selection process and screening to determine whether or not they want to interview you. So that's something to really keep in mind. If you've got it described one way in your previous resume about a job, but they've got it described another and it means the same thing, consider using their job terminology. Sometimes it's just a little bit of change in semantics, but it can be very, very effective. So put it in their words with their job terminology. The other thing I want you to be aware of is as we talk about employers selecting a resume from a large pile that's in front of them, oftentimes it's 100 people who apply for any given job on the Berkeley campus. And when that happens, they usually give it a 15 to 20 second scan. So you're thinking about the formulation of this resume relative to what is going to make me survive a 15-second scan of this employer so that they call me for the interview. One way to think about how you're going to make it aesthetically pleasing when you market yourself to a new employer. All right. Formatting. When we talk about formatting, generally speaking, there are three primary types of formatting for a resume. One is the one most people are familiar with. You've got your jobs listed in chronology from most recent to the oldest, and this is something that employers are very used to seeing. It's commonplace for them. But sometimes when somebody walks into a new opportunity or wants to explore a new opportunity that is a little bit different than what they've been doing for the last 5 to 10 years, and they want to make a little bit of a change, they want to either transfer from specific job titles and roles but use similar skills, or they want to use similar skills but change into something quite different. In that case, oftentimes career counselors will recommend to employees to go ahead and put down their skills and qualifications in what's called a functional resume format, where you're featuring and highlighting the skills that are going to be relevant to the job you're applying for this particular opportunity. But the thing I really want you to be aware of is if you have your very first page with your name, your contact information, and a summary, and then you have 3 main sections of perhaps management skills, communication skills, technical skills, and then they have to flip to a second page to see a work history about where you actually used or acquired those skills. I want to let you know employers absolutely hate having to do it. They hate functional style resumes. So in the case where you are perhaps transitioning to a new opportunity or a new type of job or job title and you want to highlight skills that you've used that would apply to that type of job, you want to hone in on use of a combination style resume. Combination style resumes are my highest recommendation, whether all the jobs you've done sort of have a career path and career ladder to advancing to a next opportunity or not. And the reason why is because not only do they provide the chronology that employers are used to and comfortable with and familiar with, and they understand it and that process and the way people are marketing themselves, but they also highlight your skills and qualifications. I saw that somebody was handing out my handouts. Thank you so much. You will see on a couple of the resume examples that are coming around exactly what I mean by combination style resume. You see a job listing and then you see particular skills that were used in that given job that are going to pertain to the job of interest that somebody's applying for. And that's the kind of example that I most highly recommend when you look at creating an awesome format for marketing yourself and one that is aesthetically pleasing. Any questions so far? Okay. The other things to think about when you're formatting your resume isn't just style, but has to do with some of the logistics around things as simple as font and size and use of bolding or italics or underlining and that kind of thing. Some people can get really carried away with use of a lot of different types of fonts or a lot of different kinds of bolding and underlining. I really want them to see this or I really want them to see that. And the reality is the best thing you can do for yourself is be very consistent and selective with how you feature particular information with use of font styles and bolding or underlining, for example. You also never want to go beyond 10 to 12 point in font, lower or higher, that is, because it's too hard to read. And you want to stay away from scripted fonts, things that are real swoopy and almost look like they're handwritten. Employers hate that, they can't read it. And when they have 100 to review, they are literally gonna go, ugh, I can't read this. And they're gonna put it to the side, whether you have the qualifications or not. So really think about how well it is to read, how easy it is to read, and how aesthetically pleasing it is. Also, if you bold all of your job titles throughout your resume, just make sure every single one is bold. If you underline the organization, make sure all the organizations are underlined. What that has a tendency to do is it creates a fluid pattern for the employer and it makes it very easy for them to read and scan in that 15 seconds. They can quickly see what your job titles were, they can quickly see what your skills are. If you've got your skills underlines, maybe your job titles are bolded and your secondary skills that are prompted underneath your specific job titles are all underlined. That pattern creates an aesthetically pleasing process for the employer to go through as they're reviewing your resume. And these little things, believe it or not, make a huge impact on the actual process of selection and review for the employer. All right. Resume sections, there are, about 5 to 6 common sections in a resume, but I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what each one is for and what the impact is all about. So your header and contact information, that's obvious. They need to be able to reach you and they need to be able to know who you are. But the one thing to keep in mind is some people say, I don't want an employer to steer clear of me because, I live an hour away for a commute. So what should I do in that situation? And some people go ahead and put a P.O. box because then they don't have to worry about that. And so if you work in Berkeley, for example, and you want someone to not worry about the fact that you live in Antioch, for example, or something like that, you can have a Berkeley P.O. box and then not worry about where you live that's on your resume. The one thing that, oh yes, I see your hand up back there. You don't have to have a physical address. You absolutely do not. But it is a little strange if you don't have a P.O. box or some kind of address, just because it's just familiar to them, not because it's required. So think about it from that perspective. It's not required, but if they can reach you, that's the most important thing. They are accustomed to usually seeing some form of address. So generally, I would suggest a P.O. box if you don't want to put a physical address. Or maybe you just put the city and state if you don't want to put your street address, for example. Did somebody else have a question? I thought I saw another hand go up. Okay, great. So the one thing I want you to really take in today is that no matter what job you're applying for, no matter what level, no matter what skills you want to use or what job type you're going from and to, you always want to have a summary of qualifications on your resume. This is the #1 area of the resume that you want to switch up and massage and adjust based on the different jobs you're applying for, because you don't necessarily need to change your resume for every job you apply for in terms of the actual job listings and the experience that you've had and your work history, but you do need to think about the skills headers and the descriptions you're using in those headers to how it pertains to the job you're applying for, as well as the summary of qualifications, because that's the place where you can really make an impact on the employer that you are targeting. Now, a technical skills summary on a resume isn't something a lot of people are familiar with unless you are in engineering, IT, research, those kinds of fields. So generally speaking, if the job you are applying for is highly technical in nature, I would recommend that a technical skills summary show up on that first page. Maybe it's a list of particular skills affiliated to the role in IT or the role in the research field that you work within, but that is what I would recommend if you're in a technically affiliated industry. If your technical skills, on the other hand, merely assist you in doing the work that you do, but are not the primary target of the work that you do, you want them listed towards the end of your resume, just prior to your education. Education generally goes last. So think about the field you're applying to decide whether or not technical skills should be featured right up front or towards the end. Your professional experience on your resume is sort of the meat on the skeleton, so to speak. Your muscles, your tendons, that's what your professional experience is relative to the skeletal process of a resume, because it is the thing that everybody's going to gravitate towards after they see that your summary of experience makes you relevant to this particular opportunity. And so the professional experience is generally the longest and the largest portion of the resume. Your education should be featured. Put your highest degree that you have earned on there, unless you have certain licenses or things that you've done in past jobs that are not at all related to the nature of the work that you're doing. Don't worry about those, leave them off. The thing that's really important when you think about, should I put this on my resume or not, the answer to that question is it's another question, is it relevant to the employer for a particular opportunity? Let's say you have a esthetician's license or cosmetology license or something like that, and you did that for a number of years, and then you finished your degree and now you're in a completely different field. I would not put that on your resume if you're not doing that work anymore. It's irrelevant and it's just one more thing for them to read. So think about it from that perspective. Honors, awards, and associations, fine and very relevant in some situations to put on there, but make sure they are in fact relevant. Don't list half a page of honors and awards that just don't seem relevant to that employer and are just more for them to read. Feature the ones, for example, if you're a Berkeley employee and you're still transitioning to another Berkeley opportunity and you received a few spot awards, those are very relevant. Put those on your resume, for example, okay? Another question?
Just to go back to leaving off the jobs that are not relevant to the new job, what does that look like if it shows that it seems like you have a break in work history? Is that still okay?
So what she's asking about is if you were to leave off a particular job on your resume because it just didn't seem relevant to a new opportunity that you were applying for, should you leave it off and therefore have a break in your position? And the answer is no. I wouldn't leave it off unless it was a very short-lived job. You know, if it was 6 months or something, yes, you could leave it off. But when you see job breaks in a resume of a year or longer, it actually can be a red flag for an employer because they can kind of wonder what did they do during that time, and their mind can go to the worst, literally. So the best thing for you to do is to keep the job listed and feature the skills excuse me, that may have some relevance to the job you're applying for. Feature the secondary headers in the skills section as a combination style under each of those jobs that don't seem to have a lot of relevance, and make the transferability of the skills the relevant issue in a job like that. But definitely don't leave a big blank spot in your resume if you can avoid it, okay? Yes?
So I have a three-part question.
Okay.
So I guess the examples that you gave us, I guess they are pleasing to the eye. Yes.
Yes.
So, in your experience, the pleasingness depends on the industry or in the area we're going? So that's one question.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good question.
The other question is it true that the resume should be only one sheet or just
Yeah.
page?
Yeah.
And And to what extent the area we're applying or the industry we're applying should dictate the format?
Okay, so she's asking three excellent questions. The first one is, does the field you are entering depict how you're formatting and in what format would be pleasing to the eye based on the industry you're going into? The second is, should it only be one page in length? And the third one was, remind me of the third one again.
It's kind of the
Related to the first one? Okay.
So to what extent does the industry dictate?
To what extent does the industry dictate a particular resume? So I can tell you that if you are going into some sort of art and design industry, that may look quite a bit different than the examples I gave you today. But the examples I gave you today are very relevant to both corporate sector and higher ed in terms of something that would be appealing, aesthetically pleasing, and very relevant, okay? Both of those are gonna be very relevant. In terms of the myth of a resume being one page in length, it truly is a myth. And the reason why is because as you move forward in your career and you are beyond 10 years of experience in your career, 20 years perhaps, if you only have one page of resume and you have 20 years of experience and you've done a lot of wonderful things in your career, you're really gonna minimize what you're featuring as your contributions to a next employer. So I highly recommend that you get that myth out of your mind and realize that the better question to ask is this relevant to an employer? Because they no longer have a myth of one page. They really do not. Unless you're, 5 years of experience and you've only worked at one place outside of your college degree, for example. Then one page may be very relevant for you. But that's the better question to ask is, am I doing the best job I can to feature the skills and experience that this employer would want to see in my candidacy? And if the answer brings you to a second page or a third page, that's okay. I personally have a 4-page resume, and I can't get it down any further because of all the different things that I've done in 25 years. So I have brought it down occasionally to 3 pages or whatnot based on certain relevance and things like that, but I also don't want to leave big blanks in my experience. And the truth of the matter is, my very first job out of my master's degree is relevant to what I'm standing up here doing for you today as a career counselor. So if it's relevant, keep it in. Don't worry so much about the pages, okay? Yes? Okay, so she's asking if the employer requires a cover letter, of which I'm going to answer that question first, and then should you still have a summary in your cover letter or your resume? The answer is you should always write a cover letter, whether they said they want one or not, because that is a writing sample that they're going to want to see no matter what. And secondarily, your summary should always be in a resume along with the submittal of a cover letter. So that is something I would recommend no matter what, because those are writing samples that they get to see, and you get to highlight even more depth and breadth that your resume can provide in a letter. You can get very specific with some examples and projects.
I think that the identical summary should be in both the cover letter and the resume.
No, they should not necessarily be identical. There may be one piece that shows up similarly, but if I had the opportunity to do a cover letter writing session with you guys, I absolutely would. But the main thing to think about, I'm going to give you one big tip that is the pattern of how you want your cover letter to show up. You want your cover letter language to say multiple times throughout 4 paragraphs that should always keep to 1 page. Cover letter should be 1 page. My experience handling ABC directly meets your needs involving XYZ. You're not going to use that exact language, but that is the pattern that you're going to show in a cover letter over and over and over to an employer, and you're using the job description, which I think we're about to talk about. Go back. No, we're going to talk about summary first, and then I will talk a little bit more in a bit about how you can prepare for both your cover letter and your resume based on the job description. Okay, so I will get to that. Right now, let's go back into the order of your headers. Let's talk about summary of qualifications because it is very important. A lot of people get really, really caught up on how to do this effectively. They stress out, they don't know, how do I write a summary, what do I say? And I'm gonna really create a simple way for you to do this, okay? First of all, you want it to be about 4 or 5 bullets and descriptors, and you want it to sort of be a funnel that goes from the most relevant overarching areas of coverage for the employer down to more and more depth and breadth as you go and extend down to your 4th or 5th bullet. It should sort of encourage the recruiter as they read it to dig in further and want to go ahead and move forward into the professional development or professional experience area of your resume. So for example, the very first statement on a summary of qualifications, my highest recommendation is make this one unbulleted. This is your professional identifier statement. And this is the statement that sort of is the initial grabber for the employer or person reading the resume, okay? So this can be very specific to the actual job that you're applying for. Maybe you're a senior network engineer, so you're gonna put senior network engineer with expertise handling, and then you always usually want about 3 to 5 areas of expertise that you're gonna highlight in that professional identifier. So, and you also wanna really hone in on using your business title versus your payroll title. Everybody knows the difference of that here at Berkeley, right? The payroll title, blank assistant something, nobody knows what that is. Nobody at Berkeley knows what that is, and nobody outside of Berkeley knows what that is. So be specific. Maybe you are an executive assistant, or maybe you are a training coordinator, or maybe you are some other type of program assistant or coordinator, or whatever the case may be. Use the functional title, the one that people know what you're talking about based on the title itself. And that can be your professional identifier in your summary, or you can be even more general. And you can say, for example, in my case, maybe I say training and development professional, for example, versus, let's say I decided I wanted to go back into recruiting or technical recruiting. I could say senior technical recruiter with experience doing recruiting and training from levels of entry to, you know, up to assistant vice chancellor, or you know what I'm saying? So you can do things like that and be more general and broad based on what you are applying for. So you get to massage that. And the idea here is use what's going to market you well for this particular situation and this particular employer. But play with it a little bit and get a sense of what do they want to see. Look at the job description, look at the patterns in that. What are the 3 main areas of responsibility you would be doing in this job? And if you have those experiences, make those your areas of expertise in your professional identifier statement. That's what I mean by marketing yourself. It's not fraudulent in any way. It's highlighting the features that make you a more direct fit for that particular employer. So you can see, based on what I just described, the example here, senior network engineer with 7 years experience in the telecommunications industry, particular expertise in A, B, and C, whatever those may be, okay? That could be your professional identifier. And then following that, you're gonna have a few bullets that feature more specialized expertise, such as what you see here, proven expertise in design, development, and implementation of complex infrastructure systems. Then you're gonna go a little bit deeper yet and have a couple more statements that indicate depth of experience, like initiated system design changes, published analysis, and presented at international conferences, or uniquely skilled in communication of complex data to general audiences. So that has a communication component which employers really seek out. In nearly every job, the #1 skill people want to see in their new employees is communication, both individually and in groups, formally in presentation style, or in meetings, for example. They want to see that somebody can do that. So anytime you can feature that in a very formal way is an effective thing to do. I want to answer this question before I move on. Yes? Okay, she's asking a great question. If you've presented at conferences, should you list out what your presentations have been at those conferences? And I think that if presentation skills are a very prominent part of the requirements for that job, you absolutely want to, at minimum, specify that you've presented at conferences. And if the topics of coverage are relevant, I would definitely list them. If you have several, one that would list out, more than a quarter to half a page in a resume, maybe you mention a general idea of the topics of interest. Like for me, mine might be career and professional development topics versus listing out resume writing, cover letter writing, job interviewing, those kinds of things. Do you see what I'm saying? So that's what I would do in that situation. Yes?
Do you mind stating the last tip you made about what employers are looking for on this particular section?
Yeah, in summary of qualifications, what they're looking for is, number one, they want to be prompted to know, should I read the professional experience section further? Does this person have the overarching depth and breadth of experience that I need for the requirements of this job? So you want your summary to be able to address those questions for them. And in doing that with your professional identifier and then creating more of a deeper dive into some depth and breadth and particular expertise, that's going to help them do that. And then the final summary of qualifications statement is a little bit different than the ones I've just described. What it should include is something that you are recognized for. So this could be something that shows up in your performance reviews. Maybe it's things in peer reviews that show up multiple times. Maybe you're recognized for really being a leader among your particular teams of staff, or maybe you're recognized for being a problem solver over and over and over again. You seem to gravitate towards what the problems are in the unit and you come up with resolutions, or whatever the case may be. But those kinds of patterns show up sometimes in a performance review across multiple bosses and jobs, and those are the things that, if they're relevant to the kind of job you're moving into, then those would be a wonderful thing to feature as your closing summary of qualifications statement. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So putting it all together, you can see here that you have your professional identifier statement, which is not bulleted, followed by your bulleted statements thereafter, which we've read through. But you can see kind of this umbrella or reverse funnel effect from the umbrella, that you're going deeper and deeper and deeper into a summary that should take up no more than to a quarter to a third of your first page. It wouldn't go into a half a page on your summary, but up to 1/3 of the page could be very relevant. And some other styles of summary of qualifications may be those bullets pertaining to particular skills areas. So you might have a skill header or a bucket of particular area of expertise that you're going to highlight as well as the content. So not just bullets, but labeling what those bullets are is also very effective in your summary. Okay? Any questions about the summary before we go on? Okay. All right. Yeah.
Sorry.
That's okay.
What you said about closing the qualifications, the summary of qualification with what?
You want to close your summary of qualifications area with something that you are recognized for, that is a pattern that would be very appealing to the new employer. Maybe you've done your research on your new employer and you learned that they have a tremendous amount of organizational change right now. And maybe you've been recognized for being very much a leader rising to the occasion in organizational change and helping to move things along and making change management more effective. So maybe that's what you would cite, for example. And then it's very relevant because they're going through all kinds of change and they would see, wow, this person might be able to help us out. Do you see what I'm saying? Okay. Okay. Yes?
So it's in the summary of qualifications where we have to focus on a specific active verbs, or is throughout the whole resume?
She's asking a great question. Is the summary the place where you focus on specific active verb usage, or is it throughout the whole resume? The answer is throughout the entire document. The reason why the use of an active verb on the front end of your descriptors is so important, and I'm going to go ahead and skip to that right here, is because it shows your highest level of responsibility. right? So if you have things like managed, oversaw, led, those kinds of words that are relevant to the nature of the problem, project, or situation that you are featuring in that descriptor, that puts you at a place where you are describing the highest level of contribution and responsibility to that employer. You also can be very strategic in the way you use placement of your descriptors throughout your resume. If you put, let's say, 2 to 3 secondary skills headers underneath each chronological job listing, and you know that 50% of the job is going to involve managing people, you want to put your managerial or supervisory affiliated bullets at the top part of that chronological listing of that job. So you want to feature that first, and then the things that you might be doing 25% of the time or 10% of the time. You know how a lot of the jobs feature that on Berkeley. They don't necessarily show that when they show the job description, but usually you can get an idea for that by the responsibilities that they're listing and the order in which they're listing it in the requirement section as well. So that's how you want to be strategic in the way you market yourself as well, is where are you placing the importance of those particular skills and uses. So I think I covered technical skills enough, but what I want to do here is, as we talk about professional experience and dive deeper into formulating your descriptors, I also want to mention this because this is a mechanics and formatting issue. Make sure you are consistent with how you're using your title, your company, your descriptions, etc., throughout each and every job you're listing, because that, again, is the pattern that helps an employer move through the document with ease. My highest recommendation is have all of your dates right justified. In your line of your job titles and your companies, have your dates all the way to the right. They are very important because you don't want to leave them off and create a red flag for the employer about how long you were or were not at a particular organization, but it is the least important of all the information on a resume, okay? All right, now, when we talk about formulating your descriptors, starting with action words in your professional experience section, you want to make sure that you look at creating accomplishment-based statements. Somebody had a question back here. Yeah.
It was not about this, it was about employers and being consistent.
Yeah.
Really quickly, my program just moved from Office of the President, where it's been for many years, and now we're at Berkeley very recently.
Yeah.
Everything really stayed the same, we just moved locations. Do you have a recommendation on how I would handle that? I mean, on one hand, I was at Office of the President for all these years, I want to show that.
So she's asking about if the location of her particular organization has shifted to a different part of the organization or is described differently. I think what you can do is list the new description, and then as you list it, and then you can say formerly, and then specify what that is, okay? All right. So when we talk about the descriptors in your resume, first of all, always use bullet style resume. Do not use narrative style resumes where you're describing what you've done in a quarter to a third of the page with nothing but what looks like a run-on sentence. Of course, it wouldn't be a run-on sentence, but to an employer reading it, that's how it feels for them because it's just too much information. And we know from psychological studies that when you break up information into small chunks of digestible content, it's remembered much more effectively than if you do narrative style. So that's my highest recommendation, is to do bullet style resumes and to make sure you hone in on your accomplishment-based statements. They are the best way to demonstrate that your past skills will be directly relevant and helpful to the new job of interest. They also inadvertently prepare you for the behavioral-based interview questions you're going to get in the interview process for that job, and they show an employer the highest level of contribution capacity that you have done. So those accomplishment-based statements are critical. And each one of them, yes, should start with an action verb, because what an accomplishment statement does is it does something what we call use of the PARS method. An effective accomplishment statement features the P, the PARS, the project, the process, the situation, the challenge, etc., or the problem, and the action you took in handling that problem, as well as the outcome or the result derived from the action you took in handling that problem. Now, the way we write it in resume style formatting is a little bit reverse, right? It's more like, should be APARS or whatever. The A comes first, the P, and then the result, okay? And the summary statement of the P, the A, and the R is your final bullet, right? So if you're having trouble creating your descriptors, write your problem, and a really good way to look at these is go to your original job description, look at what your requirements and responsibilities were on that job description. Those are the problems, projects, situations, those kinds of things. Look at those, hone in on what is commonplace in your job. That's your problem. What do you do every day or on a routinely regular basis to handle that problem? That's your action. And then what's the result? Results are both quantitative and qualitative, okay? So the more you can make a quantitative result, like increased something or other by 50% or that kind of thing, numbers talk a lot. But they are not the only type of descriptor and qualifier. The other type is those that describe improvements in morale or things like that, okay? So those are things that sometimes are not numerically based, but they're just as important. So both of your bullets and descriptors can show quantitative and qualitative information. Any questions about this? This is going to come up again a little bit. So let's look again. PARS, the problem, project, situation, or responsibility is going to be featured in each descriptor, as well as the action you took in handling it and the result derived. What was the achievement or the outcome of that action that you handled? And then placing all three of those together is what is your final summary statement and your final descriptor. So let's look at an example here. Managed and maintained all records pertaining to purchasing and inventory. That's your problem, project, or situation. Your action consolidated and computerized all records into one system. And your result, new tracking system reduced annual costs by 20%. So your final bullet in combining those three is consolidated purchasing and inventory records management system resulting in 20% annual cost savings. You see how that works? So you're going to kind of piece all of those together. Now, the other tip I really like to give people is this when we talk about your descriptors. One of the things I see when I review lots and lots of resumes through the years and in a training capacity, like in this one, is that most people have the problem and they have the action, but they do not have a result. And that is the piece that is the very most important thing to an employer because they want to see, well, what did this person do about it? What changes did they make? How did they contribute to that organization? And therefore, how would they contribute to my organization? Yes? Yeah.
PAR is what helps you get there.
Right. The PAR together, fused together in a summary statement, all parts are present in the S in PARS, right? And that's what each of your bullets, each of your descriptors on your resume, if they contain those, you're going to kill multiple birds with one stone with this, really, because you're going to not only describe to the employer your highest level of contribution, but you're going to be preparing for your behavioral-based interviews, and you're going to be telling them how you can contribute to them in this new job. So it really is an effective way to market yourself. The other thing I want to mention is that because the result is the part that a lot of people fail to have on the PARS statement itself, is to think about some of the words that help you with the transition. Okay, so I'm going to give you about 5 words right now. The 5 transitory words that I like to see the most and that I think are most effective are things like increased, decreased, resulted in, ensured, captured. Those kinds of things are your good transitory words for an employer to see that there's a result indicated there. Okay, yielded is another one. Those are the transitory words for that final phrase in your descriptor that shows a result is present. Okay? And you'll see some of that in the pattern of those examples I gave you. Yes?
This is related to the employment section, but what if you have a gap
Okay, so she's asking a great question. She's asking if you have a gap on your resume because maybe you stayed home with kids, took some time off work, whatever, how do you handle that? And depending on what you did prior to that time and what you did after that time is going to change a little bit of how you would handle it. But if you have experience relevant to what you're pursuing in the present, as it pertains to some work you did before you took that time, you want to feature both. And then, believe it or not, I do recommend that you feature, maybe your job title is head of household during that time, and you are specifying skills that were used in coordinating and things like that. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I think it's excellent when people can find a way to intelligently describe the work that they do, because I know, as a parent myself, that's some of my best accomplishments. So you can do that if you took that time off, and you can feature it that way. If you don't want to do that, you can just indicate the time block and what you were doing instead of writing descriptions, and that's acceptable too. But I do think it's a good idea to feature that you were out during that time, because, worst thing for an employer to think is, was this person in jail? I mean, it sounds silly, but, they think of things like that. So yes, you're welcome. One more question, and then I want to make sure we finish up before, yeah.
If your job involves mostly following protocols and giving information to the decision makers and that kind of thing, and you don't really have things to put on your resume with those action words, but you've been a good employee, how can you highlight that?
Okay, great. So she's asking if you are more of the follower of protocol and you are following the recommendations of the leadership above you, and you are doing what is coming down, so to speak, how do you feature that you are a quality employee? And I love that you're asking that question, because what that tells me is, number one, you're worried that you don't think you're going to be able to express that. And I want you to know that those who enforce policy and help with the change management by showing that they are effective contributors to new protocol and processes are very important in an organization. So maybe doing a little bit of research on what they call the quiet contributor. You can find that online, and those kinds of things will show you things about some of the people that are more silent and working, maybe they're off in the corner, they don't talk a lot, but they're a huge contributor based on what they do, and it's very behind the scenes. There's a lot of research around that, and those employees being very key to the success of an organization. So I would recommend you look that up, because don't sell yourself short. And there's also online descriptors based on functionality, like management and communication skills and that kind of thing. And there's a whole page of words that are affiliated to that, and you can find the ones that seem most relevant to the work you did. And that can be a very helpful way to navigate that. Okay? You're welcome. So let's go ahead and get through a few more, and then I'll definitely leave some more time for questions. We talked about education a little bit. It generally is listed towards the end of your resume, and you want to put down the degree that you got and where you got it. The one thing I want to feature here really is, unless you are still finishing up a degree and it's not yet finished, and you're going to say pending 2019 or something like that to show when it will be completed, general rule of thumb is leave the dates off. Okay, dates on a resume when you're into a career 20, 25 years can create a situation that employers are legally not supposed to do, which is age discrimination, but it is still something that occurs. So you want to keep that off and focus on the skills. Now, if you do go back 25 years in your resume and your professional experience listed positions, it will start to show that. But don't be as concerned about that as you are about putting the date on a specific degree. The where you got the degree and the type of degree it is the most important thing over the date. And then again, honors awards and associations, list them if they're relevant. If they're not really relevant, it just looks inappropriate and like more reading for that employer. Yes?
Just on the dates, you should list dates for the professional experience.
You should list dates for the professional experience, absolutely. And if this is a good question she's asking, because it brings me to another thought that I want to be sure and share with you, which is if the first, let's say, 5 years of experience in a 20 to 25 year career don't feel very relevant, and you've done so much work since then that doesn't negate in any way you as an employee, if you left off that first 5 years, you can consider doing that. Leaving the first 5 years off doesn't make you fraudulent in any way. If it's not relevant work to what you're doing, you can leave it off if you want to try and be more strategic and not worry so much about whether that employer will impose age discrimination. Okay, it is a strategy.
Or do you then say, you know, additional work-related experience upon request?
No. She's asking, do you say additional work experience upon request? And I would say no. If it's not relevant, you make the decision right there whether you want to share it with them. I think it's the jobs that fall in between other jobs you don't want to leave out because you don't want gaps. But if the first few years seem pretty irrelevant because you just couldn't quite get the right kind of job you had in mind after college or whatever, keep it off to help with those date alignments. Yes?
So if you've had awards or honors, but it's been 5 years, like 5 years or longer.
10 or 15 years since you received a particular award? Yeah.
Don't put that in.
I think the question is it relevant to the nature of the work that you do? Sometimes showing things 15 years back, 10 years back, 5 years back, you show a pattern of progress and you show a pattern of contribution. So sometimes featuring 10 to 20 years of work is not a bad thing. So I want to be sure and make that clear too. Okay? I'm going to get your question in 1 second, okay? I want to make sure we get through this information before we move to the next session, that is. We do have 20 minutes in between the sessions, so even if the camera goes off and everybody's partying and you have some questions for me, I'll be here if you want to ask more questions and you didn't get it addressed, okay? All right, quickly we're going to talk about mechanics. This is the thing that seems the most obvious to people, spelling, grammar, those kinds of things, but it just can't be stated too much because I've seen things like Project Manger, and Manger isn't going to be picked up in spell check, and yet it happens all the time on a resume. The thing I've had a tendency to do is to say that instead of than or and instead of a, and that stuff doesn't generally show up in spell or grammatical check. And so I put it away, read it over again multiple days later, have a friend read it, those kinds of things. Absolutely do that. It's worth your time if they check a couple of spelling errors. I can tell you that in the nearly 9 years I spent doing talent acquisition here at Berkeley, I had one situation where a hiring manager had literally the most perfect candidate. This was a senior level hire, and they did not accept this person as a candidate to even interview because they had the word "it's" incorrectly in their cover letter. It sounds ridiculous, but that's what happened in this particular situation. So you just can't be too perfect with your grammar and spelling on a resume. We talked about this. We debunked the myth of a one-page resume with one of the questions that came up earlier, so make sure it's relevant. 2 to 4 pages in length is commonplace and acceptable, especially with 20 or more years of experience. We're going to do a quick review, and then I'm going to ask or answer some more questions that folks had. We had another one over here. So we talked about how your resume is a self-marketing document. And if you think about it that way, prepare it as such. Prepare it as a way for you to brand yourself and optimize how you're seen in that employer's eyes and how you're going to contribute to that employer. You want to make sure that you think about it in terms of the resume getting you the interview invitation. It's not going to get you the job, but it is going to potentially get you the invitation for the interview. And that, if you got that phone call, you did your job with a quality resume. That's the goal of a resume, getting the interview call, okay? Chronological or combination style resume is preferred. My highest recommendation is a combination style resume. Even if the kind of work you are planning on applying for in your next opportunity is highly related to that of your previous, and that one was highly related to the previous, etc. If you do a combination style resume and you insert your secondary skill headers underneath each of your chronologically listed jobs, it provides you with an opportunity to be strategic in how you market yourself. And I highly recommend you do combination style resumes. Summary of qualifications should be on every single resume you submit, okay? Resumes are almost always submitted electronically now. They are not printed out, but they will print them out on your end. So the other tip I have there is make sure you submit a PDF if you can, so that when they print it out, all the formatting and everything you did to make it aesthetically pleasing and beautiful is not messed up because of something on their particular print selection, okay? PARS methodology is a must for highlighting professional accomplishments. Your problem, project, or situation, your action, and the result derived from that action, that's the pattern of information that tells an employer how you can contribute to them in this new opportunity. And professional experience is the header I would also recommend when you do list out your work experience, titles, and particular skills used in each job. Do not use work history. It's too bland, and it harkens back to the functional style resumes that employers hate. So be sure you use professional experience as your header. And then make sure the information's relevant. If the question is this really even relevant? You can leave it off. Keep the bullets that you use perhaps on a different resume for under a specific job. Maybe there's a specific part of a job that you did that isn't going to be used at all in this next job. Keep it off, but keep it on the side so that when you apply to another job and you have that, you can pull from that and use it to market yourself differently next time, okay? And then always accompany a resume with a cover letter, every single time. It's a way for you to give your new employer a sample of your writing. Because they won't always ask for one, but your letter can provide them with one. And it's another way for you to sell yourself. I had a couple hands that were up a little while ago, but I wanted to make sure I got through information.
So, you mentioned grammar, right?
Yeah.
Oftentimes when you have the recent position,
Yes.
and you're using active words like active verbs,
Yes.
and you have the past position, say manage, right?
Yes.
But when you're under the current position,
Yes.
you still can, I mean, use present tense.
Okay, so she's asking a very, a logistics-related question, but a very important one. And when you are putting your resume together, it's very appropriate to use past tense on all your action words for any job that's in the past, and keep present tense for your job that is in the present. Because it's not a problem that you have that shift, because you're actually being quite accurate in the way you're using your grammar for the present job you have versus the past positions you have used and the skills you used in those jobs.
Yeah, I often kind of wonder whether or not.
No, it's a good question. It's a great question. This gal over here, you raised your hand a few times. I want to be sure and get your question.
Is a national certification considered an achievement or an education? Especially if it's
I think, I think a certification is a subsection of education. If I were to describe it on a resume, that's where I would put it. But if, this is another piece to that though, if in the requirement section of the job you're applying for, they want somebody with that certification, put it in your summary. That's where you want to be strategic in that situation. Yes?
Well, you talked about relevance. I'm curious what you would do if somebody said, I'd like to see your resume. There's no job you're specifically applying for, but how you would kind of potentially address that?
I think the question is, what is the job you're applying for? How would you write the description of the job you're applying that you want that doesn't have a formal job description? How would you write it? What would that job look like? And then feature and market yourself accordingly. And that's how I would package that differently. Yes, back there in the corner.
So how important is it to have like an updated resume that's polished and great, even if you're not looking for a new job?
Okay, so she's asking a good question. You know, if you're how important is it to have a resume sort of available at all times? It's polished and fabulous and ready to go. Should someone ask you for it? You know, I can't answer that question for each of you individually because it's going to be a different answer based on where you are in your career. If you're at a place where, you know, you would openly entertain an opportunity, if somebody said, hey, you do blah, 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 why don't you give me your resume? Let me pass it on to so-and-so. If you're in a place where you think you would be very open if somebody did that to you, have one ready. If you just got into a job, you've been in it a year, you're really enjoying it, you think you've got a few years more in you to make certain contributions based on what the scope of the initiatives and the organization has in mind, maybe that's just not in you and you're gonna back burner it. You know what I'm saying? Part of that has to do with where you're at and what you want for yourself. I don't think you have to have one ready at all times. Don't stress yourself out like that. But think about where you're at in your career and the readiness you want to have for a next opportunity based on where you sit. There were a couple more questions over here. Yes?
What about
Personal interests and hobbies. Should you put those on your resume? So I can tell you that it's generally not highly encouraged to put a tremendous list of outside interests and hobbies on a resume that especially don't have a tremendous amount of relevance. Let's say you are an instructional designer or you are a graphic designer, okay? And you do a lot of painting and fine arts outside as a hobby, very relevant. So you might consider putting something like that on your resume because it shows that it is sort of a skill that is ingrained in multiple parts of your life, not just professionally. So that might be a relevant thing to have on your resume. But generally speaking, when you got a lot of things that are totally unrelated, you know, maybe you like paragami, but you are an IT manager, probably not relevant. Do you see what I'm saying? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I'll come back to you. Think about it again. You got it?
Yes, so since everything is electronic,
Yes.
going in for an interview, are you expected to print it out and bring them for?
She's asking a great question. This is another logistics thing that most people wouldn't necessarily think about. Since everything's electronic and your resume was submitted electronically, and generally they're going to supply everybody on the committee with one of your resumes in advance, should you bring printed copies to the interview? My answer is yes, always. Will you pull them out and use them? Almost never. But have it ready. That's my recommendation, yes. Yeah, go ahead. I've got two people in a row here. You can ask first.
I had a quick question about the GPA. I noticed that they listed the GPA on their master's, but not on their bachelor's.
It's a good. You do not have to list your GPA. It's a good question. You don't have to list your GPA. If you got a degree, you got a degree. Now that being said, let me share a little story with you in that I had a colleague who was 1 or 2 courses shy of her degree at Berkeley, and she happened to also be an employee of Berkeley. Somehow it got discovered that she was these 2 courses shy of her degree, even though her resume said she had this particular degree. And when that was discovered, they could have legally terminated her, but they told her, you get that degree officially for real within 1 year or you're fired. And she did go back and take those 2 courses within a year. But that is fraud, and that is something that, you know, the university takes very seriously and could, through legal means, be capable of terminating your employment.
So if you put like this person took GPA for master's, shouldn't she include for bachelor's? Or
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. She probably got the degree. It's not as relevant. You know, master's work is generally more focused and more relevant to the kind of work you want to be doing anyway. You know, maybe she got a 2.5. She got the degree, but in her master's work, it's exactly what she wanted to do, and she thrived. You know what I'm saying? So you can put one and not the other. I don't think it's critical. Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm having trouble hearing you. Yeah. File saving for your resume documents and things like that. I would just save them on The name, I would save it by date, and then there's no confusion, you know, by date or update. Or if you have a couple different resumes based on a couple different areas you're applying for, label them based on particular industry of interest. And like, you know, training resume versus recruiting resume, for example, for my case. You want to label them according to the field you're exploring. When you send it to an employer, use your name and the position and requisition number. Yes. Yes. Go ahead, Kat.
So talking about printing out copies of your resume, is it
Yeah.
better to print it out on like nice paper that stands out?
So should you print your resume out when you do go in for that interview to the employer on beautiful linen paper that is cream colored instead of white? Doesn't matter. You want to think it does. It used to matter when things were more print based, but now it really truly doesn't matter. You can use any copy or paper and they're fine. Yes.
How do you deal with like volunteer work or boards or something you sit on that are outside of work that are relevant to the position you're applying for?
So she's asking a great question about volunteer work. If you have a lot of volunteer work that you have done in your career, and there is a tremendous amount of relevance to the nature of the work that you do, or once again, it shows particular skill use and a part of you that is permeated throughout your life, not just your employment or career in that capacity, I would absolutely list it and feature it. Don't put it front and center, but put it on, you know, the latter part of the resume prior to honors and awards or education. Yes.
If you had multiple employers from a previous career over the course of, say, 20 years,
Yes.
plus years, and that career is very different from what you're doing now, but there are certain skills that you acquire or
Yes.
demonstrated in there, is how would an employer feel if you kind of bunched it together and said, you know, work in this area during which
Right.
the bullets
So she's asking the question of if you have a career prior to your current time period in career that is very, very different, but you've got some transferable skills, how would an employer feel about you sort of grouping that in a very summarized capacity? And the answer is that would be perfectly acceptable. And I have that on my resume because I spent 5 years in the corporate sector in the early to mid portion of my career as a technical recruiter. And I went from company to company every 3 to 6 months, hired 100 people and left and went to another company, hired 100 people, et cetera. So I cite the skills that were used, the kind of positions I hired, and the companies I worked for. And it takes up about 3/4 of a page, and that's it. I do list the companies, but I don't have all the description after each company. I have the companies listed, the type of skills used, the type of positions hired, and the impacts, achievements made, and that's it. So I do condense it in that way. Yes? I'm not hearing you. I'm sorry. How do you handle?
Multiple jobs within the same office.
Oh, multiple jobs in the same office. If you have a job and you are in a particular office and you are promoted or you make a lateral move, you can specifically indicate that use the word promoted from the next descriptor as your first listed descriptor, okay? They're asking me to wind it up so they can close up their filming. If you have more questions, I'm happy to answer them in between sessions. Please don't hesitate to come on up here and ask. Thank you so much for attending resume writing today. If you want to stick around for job interviewing, you'll be seeing me again.